Eugenie Sage.
To share. I think that last speech by the Minister shows what a muddle we are getting into with resource management in New Zealand. Because as I understand what he was saying, it was that people with judicial experience will be appointed as the Commissioners on Environment Canterbury. They will be hearing the plan decisions and submissions on the plans, and yet under the resource legislation, the changes that the Minister is making to the RMA there are aimed at reducing the role of elected councillors in making decisions on plan submissions. And so we're going to get completely different regimes around the country. And in this call, I'd like to talk specifically about the plan-making provisions in Clause 19, because what the Select Committee did was restricted the scope of this clause slightly so that it only applied to freshwater plans in the regional policy statement, though I suspect there will be debate about what happens with estuaries. But the government has been very mischievous here. At the same time as the Minister's criticised the elected council for being too slow, it's now giving this hybrid model 9 years until 2019 and the Commissioners 9 years to develop new plans, and yet it is shutting off the appeal rights, not just for plans which the second-class model has finalised. It's heard the submissions, it's made the decisions, and then it says there's no ability to appeal to the Environment Court. It's shutting off the appeal rights to the Environment Court, even for plans which the Regional Council has simply notified before they've gone through that whole submission and hearing process. So it means that this bill is going to extend in its impact way beyond 2019, because the Environment Canterbury will be able to notify any freshwater plans in the dying days of the hybrid model in mid-2019, and the public in Canterbury still won't be able to appeal that plan because of the effect of this legislation applying to notified plans and not just to plans on which the Council has made decisions. And to me, Mr Chair, that highlights the government's desire to absolutely control the way in which plan making is done in Canterbury, the way in which the rule regime will work to ensure that you get a regime which irrigators and water users like, and rather than one which actually protects fresh water. And we have seen with the collaborative process which the Minister's so proud of in Canterbury, environmental organisations and Fish and Game being highly critical of that being captured by irrigators and users, walking away from the process, and so the decisions on what the plan should be will be made increasingly by zone committees and the council with appointed members on it. And it won't have the check which appeal rights to the Environment Court provide for everybody to be able to challenge those provisions. Because as Megan Woods has noted, there is no appeal right to the Environment Court, only on points of law to the High Court, which is a much more circumscribed process. So not only is this bill about undermining local democracy, but in this part it is about constraining access to justice by removing the ability to appeal to the Environment Court for not only between now and 2019, but well beyond that for all of those plans that Environment Canterbury may notify in its last dying days of the hybrid model in 2019. The other issue I'd like to talk about in this part is Clause 21 about water conservation orders. There was a report in 2011 by the New Zealand Conservation Authority, which the Minister will be familiar with, which highlighted that we have not done enough in New Zealand to protect our rivers and lakes and waterways. The Resource Management Act and the definition of sustainable management is about use, development and protection. But too much, Mr Chair, too much of the decision-making and the plan-making focuses on use and development and very little on protection. Water conservation orders have been the major mechanism which Fish and Game and conservation groups have used to implement a degree of protection, particularly around flows rather than water quality. This government, with the Principal Act, totally overrode the provision for a water conservation order for the magnificent Hurunui River It retrospectively prevented the Environment Court from hearing appeals on that water conservation order, and now in clause 21, the government is providing for the same processes which apply around the rest of New Zealand to again apply in Canterbury. We should welcome that because it is one area where Canterbury isn't being singled out for a second-class regime. But, and there's a big but here, at the same time as the Minister's giving back the law around water conservation orders to Canterbury rather than the weakened regime that exists in the Principal Act, where he had the provisions around development having to be given greater weight than the normal RMA requirements in Part 9 of the Act, which are much more about the protection of outstanding values. In the Resource Legislation Bill, that is a major attack on water conservation orders. So we will get it back in Canterbury for a short time, and then it will be taken away if the Resource Legislation Bill goes through. The Minister's shaking his head. But Minister, in the Resource Legislation Bill, you are making the requirements of Part 9 subservient to the development requirements of other provisions in the Act. So that is fundamentally weakening water conservation orders. So once again, this government in this bill is undermining the protection provisions of the RMA. It's removing access to justice in terms of the Independent Environment Court. So that means that the decisions that the zone committees and this new hybrid council make on plans will have much greater weight. They will be less able to be challenged because of the removal of that appeal right, and it's weakening the protection provisions in the RMA.